Alright, Nexus Raiders, we should be live. And let me just check on my stream. Still in the midst of unpacking from the move, but I'm Kaimo Tripson. My room is a mess. Tassadar is asleep. And I will be bringing you tonight's episode of Heroes 101, where we'll be talking about the best support in the game, probably in quotes, Auriel from the Diablo universe. And we'll be talking about some of her strengths and weaknesses, her kit of abilities, and best ways to get the most value out of yourself and your team, as well as a couple of talent builds and alternate talent suggestions, when to draft her, good maps, good team compositions for yourself, as well as what team compositions to be wary of in terms of what the enemies draft. And I wanted to bring you some replay analysis, but I couldn't find the replay I wanted, so I'll probably just have a replay pack available at the end of the support series, as I will be bringing you an episode on all of the supports minus Rhaegar. So that'll be 9 more episodes, maybe 10, depending on how long Brightwing takes. So with that, let's hop into the game and take a look at Auriel and what she can do and the best way to play her. Alright, so we're going to hop into try mode for this, and I'm just going to showcase some of her abilities and talk about some tips and tricks for playing Auriel, things to be aware of in general as a support. So the first thing, of course, about Auriel is her strengths and weaknesses. Her strengths are that she has very good wave clear on a short cooldown with her Q ability. Perhaps most importantly is that she does not use any mana. She is strictly cooldown based, so she does really well in long sustained team fights when other supports run out of mana. She's the best AoE burst healer in the game as long as your team is doing damage, and her E ability, Detainment Strike, has the possibility for setting up, following up on stuns, or for disengage if you're careful on where you target it. Some of her weaknesses: she has low mobility, and her only safe spell is a hard to hit skill shot on her E with a high cooldown, so you have to be very careful about your positioning. She can be weak to dive. Heroes like Illidan, Tracer, Genji, if you miss your Detainment Strike, you're basically dead from that point. She also needs energy to heal. If your teammates are not doing damage, you can't heal them. That's comes into play when you're choosing when to draft Auriel with a team comp, and being mindful of retreating from team fights is not something that she can heal through unless you're getting good stutter step micro. And because of that, she has heavy reliance on her teammates. Without a good damage dealer, she can't carry the game on her own. So, moving into her abilities, her first ability is her Sacred Sweep on her Q, which has 2 different arcs, 180 degrees. The big arc, which does small amount of damage, and the middle arc, which does more damage. And if you hit enemies with both arcs, it stacks the damage, so you'll do damage for both of those. And this is on your 8-second cooldown and is typically used for wave clear. And to wave clear the minions, get some energy that way. And when setting up for the wave clear, you can hit all the enemies if you just use your Sacred Sweep as the minion waves is coming out and is still in a line. Let me just toggle the cooldown for a second. But one thing to point out when using this ability is that it's a relatively long cast. So you're standing there for a good second and a half without moving, and so enemies can punish you because it is, her only is essentially max value at melee range. So you're gonna have to hit Arthas with the middle ring. You have to step forward, and as soon as you step forward, the enemy team is going to know that you're setting up either for a Detainment Strike or a Sacred Sweep, and so they can punish you if you're out of position, as it's a very telegraphed ability, and that will come into her talent build later. Her next ability is her Heal on her W, which Ray of Heaven, which is on a 4-second cooldown, and will heal in a pretty good-sized AoE, equal to the amount of energy that is burned, and you'll burn all energy when you use it. Now this is the one where natively 40% of Auriel's damage to heroes gets stored as energy, and 5% of the damage to non-heroes. So doing damage to heroes gets you more energy. And even though it is a 4-second cooldown, it's not always best to simply spam your W. So for some things to consider are how full is your energy bar and what is the health of your teammates. So if, for example, you have a full bar of hope, but maybe only one of your teammates is at 75% HP, most of the time it's going to be better to save that heal to get max value and try to heal as many heroes as much health as possible, because you never know if you burn that heal to top up that enemy, or top up that ally, what the next round of enemy burst abilities is going to do to your team. And if you have a small bar, maybe like 100 or 200 points, go ahead and use that just to top up, make sure your teammates stay healthy. And a lot of the difficulty in deciding when to use the heal, of course spamming it is viable, because Auriel, if you have a good damage dealer, Auriel just puts out absurd healing numbers. But a lot of the consideration goes into how fast is your damage dealer replenishing your hope bar. If they can fill your hope bar every 4 seconds, you might as well use a full heal every 4 seconds. But you can also use it to bait out abilities. So if your team is relatively healthy and you have a full heal, you can say all 4 of your allies are at 75-60% health. You can hold on to that heal, or top up the heal, wait for the enemies to unload, basically their burst potential, and then if no one dies from their burst, heal up your team again, and then your enemy is basically out of burst damage, and then you can go from there. Another advanced strategy with using her heal is one that I particularly like in double tank or double tank bruiser melee. Anything with 2 or 3 self-sustaining melees on the front line is trying to get your front line to split the enemy's damage among themselves. So rather than one target taking a lot of damage, you'll have 2 or 3 targets splitting that damage among them, so that you can get the most value out of your heal and drop a 1,000-point heal on each of 3 targets, instead of having to use 3 heals on one target. And her last ability on her E is her Detainment Strike, which is her longest cooldown at 14 seconds, and is one of her hardest to use and most important abilities. It is her only escape or save or protection for herself or teammates, and it is a narrow skill shot that is hard to hit, and positioning is all about angles. So if we turn on Bot Arthas again, this is an ability that is very satisfying to hit, as if you hit and knock an enemy hero into a wall, they will be stunned and get some extra damage. So it's always tempting to just try and use it to hit people or for the incidental damage. But because it's a narrow line and it's your only escape, if the enemy hero is engaging on you and you're trying to retreat, or just make some breathing room, if you miss them like that, that's all you have for 14 seconds and you're most likely dead. And yeah, so let's see, do this again. Yeah. So as I said, it's all about positioning. So a lot of times what you're going to want to try and do is position yourself so that as much as you can, there is a wall, or the enemy is between you and a wall, so that when you use your Detainment Strike, you can actually, come here, Arthas Bot, go over there. if you when you use your Detainment Strike, you can actually get them into the wall for the stun and to get the follow-up damage with your team. So this is right. So this ability should really be used to get picks or keep yourself alive. Don't use it just for the incidental damage of the collision, because you may need it again in the 14 seconds, and you might not have it. And especially in team fights, using this ability can sometimes make or break a team fight. It's always tempting to just use it on the first available target that dives into your front line to help set that up. But what you really want to do is try and save it for when one of your squishy backliners gets dove, or one of their front lines goes in too far, or the enemy dives on you, so that you can protect yourself and also set up that hero out of position stunned into your team, so that the rest of your team can collapse and deal the damage. And so, yeah, the other point with her Q, or her E, is that because it is a line, it is very easy to miss, especially when you're trying to predict where the enemy is going to move and how you're moving. And so it can sometimes lead to a kill when you get the stun, but it can also save an enemy when you go for the whip and you think the wall is close enough, like this, but you actually end up just knocking the enemy out of range of yourself or your teammates, and so you can actually save the enemy's life. So it's a good idea to hold the whip until you are sure that the enemy is going to hit a wall, or you're in a position that you can knock them either into the side or backwards into your team. And her last basic is her trait, which is her crown, so you can make princess teammates. And let me pull up Vala, because Vala is under V and the alphabet goes this way, so she's down here. Alright. So when you had a target, damage that your ally deals also gives her hope, and that's on a 1 second cooldown. I think a half second now after the patch. And so then you and the damage that your had a target deal are going to be stuck into hope. So this is good to put on auto attack heroes. They do lots of consistent AoE damage. So there we go, 600 energy already just from Vala. Vala is an amazing target for hatting. Gul'dan is another amazing target. I'll get into those later. And then if you are unlucky or in quick match and don't have an optimal hat target, you can have very good hat micro and switch the hat target between heroes to maximize the value. So for example, say your team has a Li Ming and a Tychus, and maybe you have the hat on Tychus, and you can switch it to the Li Ming when you see Li Ming's combo go out. So you'll get a burst of hope generation from the Li Ming combo, and then you can switch it back to the Tychus, and so on and so forth, so that you're optimally using your hat to get the most damage done and the most healing numbers. And then her heroic abilities, technically she has two, but really it's only one. Resurrect is her first one, half a second channel that will bring a dead allied hero back to life after 5 seconds with 50% of the health that they had, which is really just to win more heroic. It won't help you win a team fight unless you're already winning it. And then her second heroic is Crystal Aegis, which will put an enemy, or an ally into, I keep saying enemy, will put an ally into stasis for 2 seconds, and then explode in, deal AoE damage to enemies within that, which will generate hope. And Aegis is her only real save, other than, you know, max hope, but it's going to be her primary whoops button. It's can be used for saving allies from death or preventing large amounts of burst damage, say like a Kael'thas Pyroblast. Just Aegis that, and it's fun. It's not a get out of jail free card like Uther's Divine Shield,
Killing spree.
where Divine Shield a target, just walk away. But with Aegis, your ally is stuck there for 2 seconds. It can't be canceled early. And so it's really needs to be used optimally so that you're ensuring that when you use it, you actually are in fact saving their life and not just delaying their death. So for example, if Arthur's bot was slightly better and Vala was almost dead, if you Aegis her here, but had no way to protect her when she came out, you're really just going to delay her death for 2 seconds, and at that point, it's probably better to save the Aegis for a target that you can save. So the best way to use Aegis is to use it to dissuade enemy aggression on that target. Say Vala is having a one-on-one with a Zeratul, and Zeratul is just beating her down. You can throw out the Aegis to force the Zeratul to back off out of the Aegis range or take the huge damage, and pick a new target. And then when the Aegis pops, you can just heal up Vala and you're good to go. So it either gives you breathing room by making them back off from the AoE damage, or forces the enemy to switch targets and focus on another hero. So when using Aegis, as I said, the important part is to save a life, not to delay death. So there's some things to think about when to use it. Is not just to insta-click R as an oh shit, hope this works button. Is the first thing to consider is, can my team peel for my ally when the Aegis pops? Is my ally in a spot that is savable, really? If you Aegis an ally that's in the middle of the enemy team, is your team willing to walk into the enemy team to provide support? Or do you have a tank that can provide a key stun? Or does the target have a mobility, vault, blink, what have you, to be able to get out of harm's way when the Aegis pops? Point 2 then is, when you're Aegising this target, can you re-engage? Throw it down, the enemy team backs off from the AoE damage, and your team can just move in, heal up, and then you're still 5 strong instead of losing. Also, if you hit him at very low health, and you don't have a full hope bar, you need to be sure that you'll either get a full hope bar when the Aegis pops, and if you do, will that heal be enough to save them? Because then, if not, you're really just delaying the death for 2 seconds. So you have to be pretty confident that the enemy team is going to be suitably distracted by your team engaging on them, or isn't going to have a high amount of burst ready for your ally when the Aegis pops. So that's a practice judgment call thing there. And sometimes, as a support, you have to let your team die. So if you don't think that Aegis is going to realistically save your ally after the 2 seconds, either that your team doesn't want to engage, can't peel, or the heal isn't going to be enough from, maybe you Aegis them under a keep and the next keep shot will take them down. If you don't have a heal ready, then you just have to let the target die and save the Aegis for a better time. It can also be used as a retreat or as bait. So there are situations where maybe your team is routed in a team fight, and as I said, Auriel is not a very good support when retreating, because if your team is not doing damage, you're not going to be able to heal them. So if you're running away and not able to heal, and the enemy's chasing you, you can use the Aegis on an ally who is the most likely to die anyway, to try and bait the enemies to pull back, cluster around that hero, and get the kill 2 seconds later, rather than chase the rest of your team. So maybe you lose one hero instead of multiple heroes. Yeah, using an allied hero to sacrifice and save the rest of your team. And so those are her 4 abilities. And because her escape is a 14-second cooldown that is a narrow skill shot, positioning for Auriel is incredibly important. She doesn't have an escape like most of the other supports. She doesn't have Malfruits or the Rhaegar's Wolf or the Kharazim. She's one of the least mobile supports. along with like Morales and Brightwing pre-10. So you have to be aware of your positioning at all times, because if you die, your team is going to die. So with her Q, for example, her Sacred Sweep, you want to be able to hit as many enemy minions, heroes, what have you, with the center portion. So coming in from the side, less optimal. Coming in from the middle, more optimal in terms of wave clear. But at the same time, it doesn't have to be straight on, because you always want to try and have the enemy hero near a wall. So maybe come in from here and try to get the whip into a wall if needed. Her Detainment Strike is the most important ability when considering position. As I've been stressing, the optimal positioning for Auriel is Auriel, hero, wall. So like maybe sides of lanes rather than the middle, choke points, anywhere near brushes where you can easily move into position to get a whip. So you can get both offensive and defensive whips this way. And whenever I'm playing Auriel and not having to focus on, insta healing priority targets in the middle of a team fight, I'm always trying to think, and even in a team fight, I'm always thinking, where's my positioning? Can I get a stun if I need to? And if I am pressured in this position by a dive hero that is, I'm going to have one chance of Detainment Strike to get off of me and my team can't peel, say an Illidan, where will I go? How can I move to set up a successful Detainment Strike stun in the next 1 or 2 seconds? So if I'm in the middle of the lane, maybe I'll try to move down here towards this tree, get the Illidan to dive, go in there, and that sort of thing. So for Auriel, choke points are actually a good place for her to fight, because allies, enemies bunch up, so you can get max value out of your heals. There's lots of walls to throw people into, and it's easy to land the center of the queue. And so being in a choke point is good, but at the same time you don't want to get caught in the choke point. So of course, always be behind your team. So let's take a look now at a couple of talent builds with Auriel to get you started. And right, so we'll go back to this screen, and let's just adjust this window a little bit, and that window a little bit. Alright.
Do not waste time, mortal. As I understand it, your kind does not have that much of it.
Okay, well, wasn't how it looked before, but that's fine, we can all see it. Alright, we got a chat. That's true. Alright, so, talent builds with Auriel. I'll start with the standard Q build that you'll see most of the time. And that's going to be, as well as the talent builds, I'll go through the 2 talent builds that I tend to play, and then I'll go through some of the other talents and highlight situational uses for those and why certain talents are less than optimal when considering playing Auriel at a high level. So for her Q build, of course, it's going to start out with Swift Sweep at 1, and this is an incredibly useful talent, because as I showed, the 1.5 to 2 seconds of standing still to cast your Q puts you out of position potentially for a long time. So increasing the cast speed of your Sacred Sweep by 50% will allow you to A, be out of position for less time, and also give your enemies less time to respond and get out of the center region and dodge the damage. So we'll take Swift Sweep at 1, and then at 4, the only Q talent is Majestic Span, increases the radius by 15% of both the outer and the inner circle, making it easier to hit enemies and minions. Across all builds and all styles of Auriel, the ideal talent at 7 is going to be Bursting Light, which reduces the cooldown of Ray of Heaven by 2 seconds, so you have a 2-second heal instead of a 4-second heal. This is just absolutely disgusting, because a 4-second window of when your enemy can kill you is a lot longer than a 2-second window. If you have a Vala or a Gul'dan feeding you energy constantly, you can spam a full heal every 2 seconds. If you're playing in QM or you don't have a good damage dealer or your team is just not playing very well, you can try with Empathic Link on her Hope, which will store some of the damage dealt by your allies to as Hope. So if you're not doing a lot of damage, you can store 25% of the damage that your enemies are taking in Hope. Stick it on a frontline hero that takes a lot of damage, does some damage, you'll be pretty okay. But Bursting Light will be the staple. Level 10, of course, will be Aegis, as I talked about. Resurrect was played in a professional match. Kind of sweet. Go check out that match. But most of the time, it's going to be Aegis, unless it's a win more or a cheese kind of strat. You do get some value with Cho'Gall, but Crystal Aegis will be your default. Level 13 is going to be Blinding Flash, and this will blind enemies caught in the center sweep of your Sacred Sweep for 2.25 seconds. So that's an incredibly long blind, and will help out your team because the enemies will do less damage, so you'll have to heal less and all that good stuff. Level 16 is all 3 of the talents are viable. Most of the time, it's going to be one of the 2 Bestow Hope talents, either the auto attack speed or the 10% spell power, depending on whether your Hope generator is an auto attacker or a mage. But if you really want to put out some absurd damage numbers, taking Reservoir of Hope stacks the amount of energy you can store every time you cast a full heal by 75. So late game, you can easily put out 3k heals with a single bar of Hope over like 4 or 5 heroes. It's an absurd amount of healing. And then at level 20, most of the time, it'll be Shield of Hope, which is essentially a Storm Shield, but slightly different mechanically, in that your allies will get a shield for 3 seconds, equal to 50% of the health they are missing. So this is ideally going to be used when your team has taken a whole lot of damage. You pop your Shield of Hope, they get a nice big fat shield, you can heal them all up during that 3 seconds and you're good to go. And so this is going to be your standard Q build. This build is fantastic for wave clear. You'll be able to clear minion waves very fast with improved cast speed of Sacred Sweep. It's also great against enemy auto attackers with the blinds at 13. And I love playing this build when the enemy has 2 or 3 melee heroes and like a melee carry, say like an Illidan or even a Ragnaros or a Greymane or an Arthas or a Sonya or any of those types of heroes that need to be up in your face, auto attacking to do lots of damage. You just blind them for 2.25 seconds and step back and they're sad. Or even just blinding the enemy's front line. Blinding their tanks up front mitigates a lot of the damage. A lot of this build is about mitigating your enemy's auto attack damage so that your heals get even more value. The best way to counter Auriel is just blow someone up before her heal can go off. So if you can mitigate auto attack damage, then they have to rely on the abilities to blow them up. And in sustained fights, she'll be able to win out just with constant, consistent heals. So her next build, let me just reset these talents real quick. Her next build is, I think, is seen less often now. It used to be reasonably popular in China and Korea. And it's straight up just DPS Auriel, which is super fun to play. And I absolutely love this build on maps with... I will address chat questions. And Kieran is... Okay, so perfect. Chew with the unprompted segue, which is absolutely amazing. So DPS Auriel, Chew's question was, do you ever take the W does damage at level 1? And the answer is yes all the time. So the damage Auriel build is Searing Light. So whenever you cast your W, it does damage in the same AoE equal to 30% of the damage dealt. And with the rest of this build, I'll go over the build and I get into when to use this and what maps it's great. So that's going to do some nice damage with your healing. The next talent is the Detainment Strike quest at 4. Stunning heroes increases the damage of Detainment Strikes. You get a nice burst DPS in there. Again, Bursting Light at 7, Aegis at 10. 13 is going to be Repelling Strike, so that you can knock enemies 35% further back, so that you have more leeway with hitting them into walls to get those stuns and to get that damage. 16 is going to be Reservoir of Hope, so that you can stack up your amount of hope you can store, which equals more damage with Searing Light, and then again, Shield of Hope at 20. So this this build is my absolute favorite build on maps like Infernal Shrines, and oftentimes on Tomb of the Spider Queen, and Towers of Doom in particular. So Infernal Shrines and Towers of Doom, I will default to this build, because Searing Light against the Skeletal Defenders, it's absolutely stupid. It gives you a ridiculous amount of Shrine Clear. I mean, Q build does too, but with Shrines and Towers of Doom, most of the time you have the situation where you have 10 heroes in a very small area clumping up. So if you have 2 melee heroes and your enemy team has 2 melee heroes, using your Ray of Heaven to heal up your front line and also getting 30% of that damage to both of the enemy front line puts a lot of pressure on the enemy healer, and you can easily just out-sustain that without mana. The other thing about Towers and Shrines that makes this build great is there are a lot of walls and obstacles around the objective, so that you can get your level 4 Detainment Strike quest stacked very quickly and get maximum damage out of that. But note with this build is to never, ever, ever, under any circumstances, use a full bar Ray of Heaven just for the damage. Or for wave clear. Your Q is for wave clear. Hope should always be used to heal your team. And also always heal the targets who really need the healing, not healing the front line just to get the damage. But with a double front line on a small map in a huge teamfight brawl, you can pretty much always get both healing and damage without having to worry too much. So that's a really great build on those small maps. You can even get over 30 to 50k hero damage with this build, depending on the duration of the game, of course. So those are the 2 standard builds. Q build is most often seen like 90% of the time or something. This damage build is less common now, just because of the utility that the Swift Sweep build gives you with wave clear. So now I'd like to go into some situational talents. So starting, of course, with those 2 builds, some of the other options. So the other talent at level 1 that is played occasionally and has some value is Righteous Assault, which is another Q talent that reduces the cooldown of your Sacred Sweep by 3 seconds for each enemy hit by the middle arc. So if you have an 8-second cooldown and you hit 2 enemy heroes, it's now a 2-second cooldown, and if you hit 3, if your enemy team has 3 melees, you can just spam Qs all day. You do give up the increased speed though, but if you couple Righteous Assault with the blinds at 13, you're essentially blinding the enemy team. You hit 2 heroes and you blind them for 2.25 seconds, and you can do that every 2 seconds. The 2 heroes in the front that you keep hitting are blinded forever and are never going to attack you. This requires very good positioning and a solid front line on your team, because you're going to be out of position, in quotes. You're going to be delicately positioned a lot to try and step forward to get off that Q. So the enemy will try to punish you, but if you can land it, it can make auto attack frontliners very sad. And the quest on Q at level 1 is not really good to pick because it's easily telegraphed. If the enemies see that you pick this quest, they know that every time you step forward, you're going to be trying to hit a Q to get the stacks, and they can either get out of the way or dive on you and kill you. And the damage boost is not really worth the risk of having a slow cast on your main wave clear ability and having to be out of position to try and get those stacks. So then at level 4, either of the Detainment Strike talents are good with the damage build. So the stun is nice for the burst DPS, and the stun is sufficient if you have a well-coordinated team with some lockdown. Either you can initiate by getting a stun, or you can follow up by getting a stun to just keep the stun train going. But another good talent is Heavy Burden, which will slow the stunned target by 40% for 3 seconds after the stun. So in less coordinated teams, or just as a safety precaution, you can grab this talent, so you can get the stun on the enemy hero, and then they're slow for 40% for the next 3 seconds, which allows your team to follow up on that stun and get the kill. It's also good for a disengage. If I like to, Butcher's a good example for this. Butcher charges you, hits you with the stun, you can Detainment Strike him into a wall, and with the Heavy Burden, he'll be slowed by 40%, so you can easily get away and disengage that way, as an example. And if your team has very little other CC, this is a great option, because without another follow-up stun or a root, the slow is really the best you're going to get, and a 40% slow is pretty good. So use that either to finish or set up kills, or to create space if you're trying to disengage with the damage build. 13 is pretty much just Repelling Strike or Blinding Flash, depending on which build you're going. Although, of course, if you're going Q build, but the enemy team doesn't have a lot of auto attackers, you of course can just substitute in Repelling Strike, just to make sure that you can get those stuns. And yes, Kieran says that yes, Noblesse and Reset combo does it way better than Lockdown, but they're two players, not just one, so there's that. At 16, as I said, all 3 are viable. If you have an auto attacker, take the attack speed. If you have a mage, take the spell power. At level 20, it's going to be your Shield of Hope, but Angelic Flight has its place. I see this a lot and play this occasionally on Dragonshire, or Towers and Warhead sometimes, as it can turn Auriel into a pseudo-global. It's best not to be the only global on the team, but you can do some weird shenanigans with having one of your teammates die at the core and then fly in there to revive them, if you take Resurrect, of course. But it's great on Dragonshire just to give you some shrine control if you don't really need the Shield of Hope. If your healing is enough and you don't just need that extra teamfight oomph, if you have a nice, big, beefy, sustained team, you can go with that and get some value out of Angelic Flight, because angels should be flying anyway. So those are the typical talents that we'll be looking at. Your build will look something like this for Q build, with maybe an auto attacker, or your damage build Auriel here on the maps with lots of walls and obstacles and lots of clustered brawls. So let's talk about maps first. Yeah, I think that's better. So what sorts of maps does Auriel excel at, and when should you look to prioritizing her? In general, she has great wave clear, so any map that wave clear is important, obviously. And she does really well in a 3-man or a 4-man rotation between 2 lanes. You can out-sustain any of the other healers, and get a ton of lane pressure just by shoving into forts and towers all day. She also does great on tight maps with lots of choke points, obstacles, walls, things that you can Detainment Strike people into to keep yourself safe. maps where there's lots of brawling or team fighting in close quarters, or a lot of sustained fights. And the last thing to consider is smaller maps are better for Auriel because you want to have short, safe retreat paths. Because she's not as good at healing while running away, you want to make sure that you can get your team out safely to the Sippy Cup in the event that you can't do damage. So as the map shrinks and you start losing your forts, or you're overextended and trying to retreat, it's going to be hard to get out on bigger maps where you can't escape down a choke point with some walls. So that being said, her best maps are small wave clear intensive maps with lots of walls. So Tomb of the Spider Queen, you can get stuns all over the place on that map, and you can clear out the spider minions and the web weavers incredibly fast with either the Q build or damage build. Brax's Holdout is another great one because she excels incredibly well in the 4-man in the bottom lane. Infernal Shrines, great map for the DPS build. And Haunted Mines, another 2-lane map where she excels in the 4-man. And Cursed Hollow is a great map because of all the choke points and the sustained fights that happen around the tribute spawns. Maps that she does okay on are Towers of Doom. Again, same reason as the Infernal Shrines, cluster team fighting and walls. She does okay on Battlefield of Eternity if you have a composition for it. There's not a lot of laning, so she can't just go into lane, get off a Sacred Sweep, fill up her hope bar that way, so she really has to rely on her teammates to do the damage. And the Immortal, being a non-hero, does not gives you only 5% instead of 8, but it can be done. She does fine on Dragonshire in the 4-man between mid and bottom, and she does pretty well on Garden of Terror. Maps where she's not super great on, Sky Temple, because it's typically run as like a 1-3-1 or a 1-2-2 or something like that, where she just gets less of value out of her ability to push. She's alright on Hanamura just because of the 1-4. And whoa, okay. And I would never by choice play her on Blackheart's Bay or Warhead Junction, with some exceptions. Let me see here. And okay, man, Chu is the best. So my next topic, of course, was going to be synergies and counters for Auriel, which he brought that up. So we're going to consider the small maps with a wave clear, and just consider, right, if you have the ideal map. So when to draft Auriel, given you have a good Auriel map? First things first, is it a good Auriel map? Yes. Great. So the first thing to consider is, what are your options for hope generators? Oops, sorry, skipping my notes. Alright, so your hope generators, any heroes that can do consistent, sustained DPS, either mage or auto attack. So the best two common hope generators are Gul'dan and Vala. You put a crown on those, you will have energy for days. Lunara also does fantastic. Her poison gives you a ridiculous amount of energy. Cassia is a fantastic hero. Zul'jin does pretty well. KT can do well if he's played right. Sergeant Hammer is another great one because you can. Oh, excuse me. You can hat a hammer, and her auto attack damage will get you a nice amount of hope from range. You can just keep her alive. And of course, the best hat target in the game is Cho'Gall, because you get hope from both Cho and Gall. Cho'Gall Auriel is like one of the dumbest combinations in the game. So good. Step one, you have a good hope generator. You're planning on a Gul'dan, a Vala, a Lunara, a Cassia for the most part. Prioritizing one of those 4 heroes will get you in good shape. And the other thing is, are you going to run Auriel as... She does fine as a solo support. It's best to do that with double tank, so you can have either
Your
um,
kind does
double
not
tank
have that
or
much of it.
a pseudo support, Medivh, Zarya. So if you want to stomp really hard in Team League, Unranked, or QM, just go Zarya, Auriel, Vala, or Vala, Auriel, Tassadar, or Gul'dan or Lunara, but um, because the Zarya and or Tassadar, I guess or not and, can throw up a shield, and then you can just throw out your heal them up before the shield expires, and you're good to go. So
I fear for the fate of the High
So
Heavens
those
around me.
those that is the death comp of easy win against uncoordinated teams. Um, and so as a solo support, she's fine as long as you have a damage dealer. But you also need a strong frontline because
Do not
if your
waste
hope
time,
generator
mortal.
dies,
As I understand it,
say
your
you're running
kind does
like
not
Auriel,
have
Vala,
that much
and
of it.
2 frontline and maybe some other damage dealer that's not a great hope generator. If Vala dies, you can't really do anything in terms of outputting of healing. So you're going to lose team fights if you lose Vala. So in that case, your focus should be on doing everything you can to keep Vala alive, and everyone else has to be fend for themselves. So that covers the do you have a good hope generator, and can your frontline protect you? Because you're weak to dive, and you need your
I
damage
fear
dealer to
for the
stay
fate
alive,
of
you
the
need a
High
good
Heavens
frontline
around me.
that can peel enemy dive heroes off of you or your damage dealer so that you can just enable your damage dealer to shred their backline and their frontline. The next thing to consider is the enemy
Do
team
not
comp
waste time,
sustain
mortal.
single target
As
or
I
multi-target
understand it,
DPS?
your kind does
Uh,
not have
Auriel does
that much
very
of
well
it.
against multi-target DPS. Single target, either the target's going to be bursted 100 to 0 or not. If yes, you're not going to save them outside of Aegis, and if they aren't, then you're good. Uh, Auriel is fantastic against sustained DPS teams. So, like, if the enemy team has a couple of auto attackers and no real burst damage, you're going to be in perfect shape to play Auriel. Um, as long as, again, you have that good damage dealer, you'll be able to heal up your team faster than they can do the damage,
I fear
especially
for
if
the
that
fate
damage
of the High
is
Heavens
separated
around
out
me.
onto multiple targets. Um, and right, and the other thing to consider is that oh right, notes. So,
Do not
right,
waste
super
time,
burst blow up
mortal.
comps. So
As
think
I
about
understand
like a
it,
Kerrigan
your
comp.
kind does not
If
have that
Kerrigan
much of it.
combo is going to be sufficient to blow up your ally, there's nothing you can do to save it. But if the Kerrigan combo hits and your ally doesn't die, that's all of their damage, and then you just heal it up. So that's the single target burst best case, is when their single target burst doesn't kill your ally, you just heal them up before their abilities are back off cooldown, and you're good to go. The other thing to consider when choosing Auriel is that she does not have a cleanse. So if you're going to need a cleanse, say the enemy has like
I fear
Malfurion
for the
roots
fate
and
of the High
Arthas roots and
Heavens
like a
around
Gravity
me.
Lapse or something, if you don't have a cleanse, it's going to be rough because they can just lock down a target and kill them. So either running Auriel with a second support, as is seen sometimes, that has that cleanse,
Do
or
not
picking a
waste
support that
time, mortal. As I
has a cleanse,
understand
or
it, your
again a
kind
shield
does
target to
not
try and keep
have
them
that
alive.
much of it.
Um, so heroes that soft slash hard counters to Auriel. An interesting Chromie is one that for a time was counterpicked against Auriel, particularly on Tomb of the Spider Queen because she has no cleanse. So when that was with Temporal Loop, so Chromie would Temporal Loop the target, and since Auriel has no cleanse, the only way to stop that is Crystal Aegis. But then
I
Crystal
fear
Aegis
for the
puts the
fate
target
of
in
the High
stasis, so
Heavens
Chromie
around
can
me.
just wait 2 seconds and then unload all of her damage on top of it. Um, so that was sort of a counterplay of do you Aegis the Temporal Loop and hope that the Chromie shoots her all of her damage at the Temporal
Do
Loop,
not
or
waste time,
do you
mortal.
not,
As I
expecting
understand
her
it,
to shoot her
your
damage
kind
at the
does
Aegis
not
kind of
have
thing?
that
So be
much
careful
of
of
it.
Chromie. Muradin can be a huge pain, especially with Skullcracker at 7 and his Dwarf Toss. He can just jump into the backline and start hitting you in the face. Um, and there's not really a whole lot you can do about it if you miss the Detainment Strike or the Detainment Strike isn't enough and you just Dwarf Toss back on top of you. So double frontline is good for Auriel to have someone there. You have your frontline tank and you have the tank that you tell, yo, if I get dove, you need to come back and save me. Falstad is tricky. Throw out the Aegis to try and save your hero. Falstad gusts your team away and free kill. So be careful of Aegis timing and playing against Gust. Any of the backline divers and stealthies, so Illidan, Tracer, Genji, Zeratul, those heroes are major headaches for Auriel, because if you can't land the Detainment Strike, you're just straight up dead. Anub'arak is a pain because of Cocoon, Burrow Charge, Varian's Taunt. Gul'dan is hard to play against as Auriel because outside of Vala, maybe Lunara, I guess, but Vala and possibly Lunara and Cho'Gall are like the only heroes that can actually do enough damage to keep Auriel's heals going to get through Gul'dan damage. So that's the, let's see, considerations of that, and that. So when considering drafting Auriel, there's two ways to approach it. There's a couple of giveaways that you're planning on going Auriel. The first is if, like, first pick Vala, for example, easy. Or like Vala Zarya is, if your second pick, a Vala Zarya or a Vala Tass, assuming Tass isn't banned, is basically screams Auriel. So if you want to really prioritize the Auriel, it's best to try and grab Auriel and your hat target within the first rotation. So if your first pick, try and grab it 2-3, and if your second pick, grab it 1-2, so that you make sure that you have at least that set up, because the tanks and the second damage, or the tank and the solo lane, can really be flexed out as long as you have your Hope Generator and your Auriel. And right, if you were to multi-support, which other supports typically pair well? So pre-Lucio nerfs, and perhaps still now, Lucio Auriel was a great combo, because the Lucio speed boost helps out with Auriel's poor mobility and gives them the healing when they're trying to retreat. But also Auriel with any support that has a cleanse is great. Auriel Malfurion was seen a couple of times. Who else? Auriel Tassadar is god tier if you can get that. Let me just pull up. I forget all of the games that I've seen Auriel played with. You can have. Oh, Auriel Uther is more common now because Uther gives you your single target burst with armor, and then Auriel can just supplement that with her AoE. And right, so let's say that you want to play Auriel, you have your Vala, you have whatever else. If Auriel gets banned in the mid phase, choose question is what support would you supplement? That really depends on the draft strategy. I mean, currently in the meta, Uther is god tier right now. Malfurion may be okay. I refuse to let him die, but really, it depends. Like, if the enemy team bans your Auriel and has a Gul'dan, grab like maybe a Kharazim. If you have some heroes with self-sustain like a Muradin or an Arthas or something, try to grab like a Morales. Anyone that can do Brightwing. There's not really anyone who can replace Auriel. And yeah, Abathur's great too. Yeah, so let's see. What heroes with spreading damage counter Auriel? Yes and no. So it depends on the damage. So heroes with spreading damage is actually fine because Auriel's heal is AoE, and spreading damage across multiple targets gives you max value with her heal. Gul'dan is tricky, but healing like a Sylvanas or a Kael'thas is fine. Just don't clump when there's Chain Bomb. Just have the damage go out, have your team clump, heal them all back up, and then they're good to go there. Supplementing Auriel requires an enabler and another normal healer. Yes, that is true. I would say less so on the Auriel double support and more of on the Auriel plus a pseudo support. Again, the Zarya Auriel Vala Tassadar, Vala, Auriel, Medivh can work too. Something that can protect your enabler while the Auriel is trying to throw out her heals. Right, so I think, check my notes here. Yeah, so that is basically the gist of, I'm trying to remember the drafts I've seen recently. So recently, I think the best time to grab Auriel is before mid-ban. If she's a comp you're going for, it's hard to draft an Auriel comp without the enemy team realize you're going Auriel and either banning or picking her out. I mean, even against some teams we've seen in like mid-season brawl, even like first banning Auriel on certain maps like Braxis because she's just dumb. Or against certain teams who like playing those comps. So that's something to be aware of. Let me just make sure I have all of these questions worked out. So, in summary, Auriel is, in terms of, she's flexible, in terms of what she can do, but she's also rigid, and then she has to have a certain hero in order to be able to dish out those heals and keep the team alive. But if you want a manaless healer that can give absurd healing numbers, Auriel's the way to go. Grab a nice Vala with it, and you can just roll teams all day. Just be aware of diving heroes. Oh, that was the other question I meant to draft. Let's see. Which heroes should you ban out when considering an Auriel draft? So Gul'dan is a good one. Dahaka is a good one. Gul'dan just because of all the like spread damage, Auriel has the hardest time with Lunara and Gul'dan, just because it's two prime hat targets they're taken away. Also, Horrify can just wreck every team, but that's true of like pretty much any support is that Horrify will wreck you. Dahaka is really obnoxious because if you're trying to play Auriel safely in the backline and he just burrows in and tongues you and drags you into the enemy team, there's not a whole lot you can do to get out of that situation because you're not very mobile. Tracer, no, she's fine. You just have to play around it. So yeah, I mean, really not much to. Yeah, not much really to ban specifically for an Auriel. Just making sure you have a tank that can protect her and a damage dealer and an off support if need be. So that about covers this session on Auriel. I will make these builds available somehow, but they're pretty standard, Q and W, which I've had up here now. And look forward to the replay pack that I'll be sending out when I finish this one. Yes, Li Ming. I did, yeah. So Li Ming is actually a reasonable ban against Auriel. As a solo supporter. So that's like her burst is just dumb in that like it's hard for your damage dealers to get within range to do damage while there's a Li Ming or a Chromie. Yeah, so Li Mings and Chromies. So that'll be it for this one. I'll be back next time to bring you Brightwing, which might take 3 or 4 days. Just kidding, I'll try to condense it, but that'll be that. So hopefully you guys have learned something about Auriel. If you have any questions about supports, I know how to play a few of them, not just Malf. RIP Malf. And hopefully you can take what you've learned and become a new support, or at least fill a support and conquer the Nexus. Thanks for watching. Bye guys.